so neanche presentare il professor Moulaert, nel senso che è talmente famoso che sarebbe poco educato presentarlo. L'abbiamo chiamato perché una delle voci più importanti, sono le più importanti sull'innovazione sociale, perché abbiamo chiesto di osservare se stesso dall'alto, fuori da se stesso, per dirci che cos'è l'innovazione sociale e allo stesso tempo quali sono i problemi con la definizione dell'osservazione sociale, quindi sarà un lavoro importante per lui. Le regole di ingaggio sono quelle molto stilizzate del nostro dottorato, naturalmente il seminario sarà in lingua inglese, la regola è orizzontalità completa. Il professor Moulaert è capacissimo e credo che abbia anche un certo gusto a discutere in maniera orizzontale, senza gerarchie, tipo brainstorming. È possibile qualsiasi domanda, qualsiasi tipo di richiesta, di discussione, di dialogo. Non è il tipico seminario all'italiana dove c'è un lecturer, dove c'è l'audience che ascolta passivamente. Poi vedremo come vanno le cose. Ci fermeremo a un certo punto quando saremo stanchi, andremo tutti a mangiare un piatto di spaghetti o quello che vogliamo, stare un po' insieme, poi dopo la siesta, se lo vorremo, 2 ore almeno, ricominceremo per poi andare questa sera a festeggiare con l'altra siesta in Berlino. Professor Moulaert, avrebbe piacere, ho detto se non lo chiedi tu lo chiedo io, adesso vi do un saluto, che voi faceste una breve presentazione di chi siete e di quali sono i temi su cui state lavorando, così ha un pochettino, diciamo, un'idea di che cosa su che cosa state lavorando e può connettersi meglio. Quindi vedete tutto molto libero, molto easy, o almeno spero. Quindi, Frank, if you want to tell something, then we can ask them to use this.
Sì. Devo dire una cosa, che sono un po' sordo, bisogna parlare a voce alta. Dove capisco le
mediation technology.
We can bring that to them, I don't think.
No, because so, ok.
Adesso cominciamo con la presentazione, vorrei capire un po' che temi lavorare.
Cominciamo su che temi lavorano, diciamo dal fondo, che è sempre una cosa. Aspetta.
You want me to speak in English?
Yes, aspetta. I only speak Italian because my English is the worst of the world. So,
We have to suggest that we would each speak our native language.
yes, it's the best.
Our native language is Russian.
That's to be hard. So, I introduce myself. I'm the only one who is new here. I'm from the PhD in Science, Communication and Technology, which is under the Department of Philosophy, and it should be interdisciplinary. So my research topic is on the, let's say, the narratives. It's on the policy of scientific research of the European Union.
Maybe you should not.
Because I tend to, So I try to speak louder. Can I hear you?
Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
Okay, so on the policy of scientific research of the European Union, which is centered around innovation, mainly economic innovation, but I'm trying to understand let's call them the social technical narratives that are inserted in the policy discourses. And there are developments, quite recent, about social innovation, urban innovation, and also the idea of inserting societal challenges as a means to include issues.
I will talk about that.
And responsible research and innovation. So the idea is to study the scientific policy of the European Union and also very much interested in social innovation.
Very good.
No, I think it's not. My name is Albertani, created cycle of PhD, and The relations which can improve the operations and there's been a recent change in the juridic It's been a role in recent times reorganization of the third sector before it was starting and there was this change in the frame of
Because you were using the microphone.
Because it has that's
Oh, okay.
that's it.
Well,
I started
My name is Pietro. This is generally speaking, I go last year because it's a complicated name in Italian, and I'm an assistant professor. I teach social education, work society, and globalization, and mostly I work on consumption and human and other interaction.
You have to speak while I'm sitting there.
And I'm a PhD student from here, from this department, so the department of social. Actually, my PhD thesis is about the link between social innovation and global development. And in particular, I will twist the responsible choice lens in order to observe development processes. And it's focused here in Bologna. And I have also spent 6 months at Crisis in Montreal. Yeah, I will go to the conference. I will present part of my PhD thesis. Yeah, definitely. And
It's a control position used by a very experienced professor.
My name is Claudia. I'm a PhD student here in Bologna, and I study digital sociology and digital health. So how digital apps for smartphone can improve the empowerment operations of governments.
I'm doing my research on labor exploitation inside the logistics sector using
Labor exploitation inside the logistics sector.
Using the institutionalism approach and doing ethnography inside the labor inspectorate to understand how the inspectorate use discussion.
How to use
How labor inspectors use discussion.
and so your field of analysis, your critical field is in Italy, logistics.
Yeah, in this region.
Okay. Just the name again.
Moulaert.
Moulaert.
I'm a PhD student here at Bologna. My neighborhood here in Bologna, characterized by its very public housing and by its peculiar spatial organization, because it's distant from the city center and isolated by the city center.
It's a fragmented area or not? Fragmented? È un'area fragmentata o?
Yes. Yeah.
And in which ways? Public spaces missing or roads crossing or?
No, the public administration invests so much in this area, in the moment of some years.
I don't know which direction we continue now.
So the name is not that different from the previous. My name is Moulaert, and I'm here as a PhD student because I'm doing other things in parallel. And so my interest for the research that I am now revised in terms of structure and objectives is between sociology of health, education and family, because the subjects
Sociology of health and
education or childhood, let's say, that I prefer, and family. The topic is how to support children that are involved in oncological treatment as siblings of patients. So not siblings. I've always been working previously on international organization, UNICEF, Save the Children, Equity International abroad, always on children, and mostly, also involving a research component, but actual research project. So that's my passion. And I have to excuse myself, but because of previous arrangement, I have to leave at 1 p.m. I'm so sorry, but I couldn't invite.
I'll find you.
My name is Niccolo, and I study social street at this phenomenon in Bologna in 2013 that tries to recreate sociality, create society, and urban regeneration. And yes, in 2013 there was one social street, now we are talking about 454 social streets around the world. And so I studied this with 3 main topics: sociality, urban regeneration, and the diffusion in different towns, and the links with the public administration.
Sociality, urban generation,
and the links between the public administration.
And the social organizations.
Yes.
We move to the right. I don't know why I'm saying this, but...
So I'm Julia, as you know, and I'm studying social street as well, assuming them as social innovation and practice. In particular, I chose 3 study cases in 3 different Italian cities, small, medium-sized cities. And my research questions are in particular if the participation to this group can influence the feeling of belonging to the neighborhood area, to the urban territory of the citizens, and also the attitude of caring towards the territory. And on the other side, if these groups can influence the governance of the city, the urban governance of the city, if they can have some powers compared to the traditional institution of the city.
My name is Sofia.
Your name is?
Sofia.
Sofia.
My research area is in sociology.
You're also a PhD researcher.
Yes. My research area is in sociology of deviance, criminology and victimology.
Sociology of
Deviance,
deviance.
criminology and victimology. And my research project concerns about community prevention policies and urban security policies.
Community prevention policies, I get that right?
And urban security policies. And I'm studying the role of the neighborhood watch in social control.
Hello, my name is Martina, and I'm not a PhD student here, but I've been a PhD student. I'm working on new forms of welfare, especially sharing welfare, and the relation between new forms of welfare, local welfare, and cities. I come from the University of Commerce.
Is that true?
I'm Elena Macchioni. I'm a researcher here in this department. During my PhD, I studied work-life balance policies.
I have to come closer. The microphone doesn't help, so my iPhone is my
It's very simple.
During my PhD, I studied the work-life balance policies as an instrument of corporate citizenship. And now I'm working on the problem of care and the role of the familial caregiver. I studied social innovation theories as a framework to understand better some best practice regarding family services.
There's some good work in Quebec going on with alternative intervention. Again, I have to ask the repeater. All the rest I can understand.
Gian, yes, you can call him
People are so shy to reveal the name that it's I understand very well the content of what they're saying, but
I'm a PhD student here at the Department of Sociology and Business Law. My research concerns social theory, in particular focusing on the relation between social ecology and sociological theory.
relationship between
The theory of social ecology.
social anthropology. Okay. And
Social philosophical
very interesting.
thank you.
Didn't mean to say that the other topics are uninteresting. Alright, which way are we moving now? The front one.
Pierre Luigi, I'm assistant professor here of sociology and communication, and my field of research are migrants and refugee crisis, and then it's quite interesting the social innovation on what they call now tech refugees, like the role of social innovation and technology to deal with the refugee crisis. And another topic is tourism and responsible tourism, and then also social innovation is linked with this.
You want to say something or?
Yes, I'm Laura Sartori, I'm associate professor in sociology as well. I normally work on digital, political and social communication of digital technologies, but actually I'm interested in social innovation because I'm working on disasters and social innovation.
I have a PhD student working on this. We have finished now church article together, so we could change it. We try to socialize the concept of resilience and resilient self, so connect it with other more sociological approaches to resilience. So that's it. Am I forgetting somebody? It was a very bad
Alessandro Martelli is coming now.
short presentation. I am Alessandro Martelli, yes, quite wrong, because I'm deaf and I need to Alessandro okay, Martelli, assistant professor here, and my topics of research are mainly two. One field is about youth provision, yes, youth participation, and the other one is about politics in general, their transformation, but also about governance and so on. This is the other so mainly these days about fight against poverty. The less I hear, the louder I speak.
I'm Riccardo Cordini. I try to manage the PhD. It's quite good with students but not with colleagues. Students not with colleagues. I study social policies, social investment, social ecology, quite everything but in the wrong way. So that's what I mean.
So there is hope.
Yes, I always have hope. For everyone.
So now I don't have to present anything because my presentation is disappearing. Find out You have a terrible job. I'm moving around all the time.
Yeah, that's no problem. I'm well paid for this job.
Riccardo, thank you for inviting me. This is the kind of post-career work I like to do. I just became an emeritus professor 3 months ago, and I rewrote my marriage contract with my wife. And 50% research and education, 50% domestic labor, including gardening, cooking, cleaning, and things like that. Also some black labor on the construction sites of my kids and things like that. But this should be erased from the presentation. Although I don't think I care a lot about black money in Belgium, but that's one of the problems of Europe, of course.
But you are in the right place to make a comment on what's working. This is the right place to talk about.
Some perspective from a distance at what social innovation is. It's a difficult question. At the same time, it's a question that has preoccupied me for quite a long time. I don't know to what extent you know my work, but I was not asked to really go through my research trajectory. just summarizing, I was trained as a neoclassical economist, econometrician, mathematical economist, and I consider my own trajectory a bit like Paul on the way to Damascus, struck by the lightning, saying, "What crap is this?" Neoclassical economics. What crap is this? I mean, what lies are they telling us? This has nothing to do with reality, except with the ideology of investors, business people, or even worse, stock market gurus who try to portray how the ideal economy should work on the basis of competition, market value, and so on. But then bit by bit I understand that I understood that society and the economy is working in a very different way. So I moved from classical economics to regional economics, where I discovered institutional interpretations of regional development, regional policy, German historical school, and so on. You can read all this. To then work for the European Commission for a few months, being fired with a golden handshake, to do work on the role of social innovation in local development. That's what I will talk about after this brief introduction. So I'll give you a survey of the work I coordinated for quasi 25 years on the relationship between social innovation on the one hand and local development on the other hand. This work was then developed by people in the planning community, which explained why I moved from the economics department to a planning department in Newcastle, and then to a planning and architecture school in Leuven for the last 9 years of my career. So that for the last 30 years, the focus of my work has been on social innovation. But not on social innovation as an instrument, much more on social innovation as a feature of societal dynamics. And before going through this list, I want to make a statement. I think that sociologists in general are not sufficiently rebellious. I mean, many of you just take on board the theories coming from innovation theory, from institutional economics, from business science, and you use those theories and you introduce the concept of social innovation. Don't take it personal, but I could cite you quite a bit of social sciences who, in what I would call an attitude of easy life or an attitude of not willing to provoke, try to just integrate social innovation in existing models of agency, in existing models of institutionalization, socialization, and most of all in the existing models of innovation systems. This I will stress quite a lot. In my view, systems of innovation theory is to a large extent not compatible with social innovation. Social innovation as a mission for society, as a mission for communities to change and improve social relations. But I'll come to the definition of social innovation. So please go back to your own sociological theory. Go back to Schumpeter. Go back to Weber with all the criticism of his modernist approach. Go back to theories that explain how society was built. Listen to the criticism that we need post-structural approaches, but don't drop structural approaches, because they explain how Fordism was built. They explain how the welfare state was built. They explain how for a certain period the world was divided between communist blocks, market-geared blocks, and things like that. So it's very important to keep these theories serious, to listen to the postmodern critique saying that agency, freedom, different agendas, different culture dynamics, and so on are important corrections to these theories, but don't drop them. Try to understand what agency understood from a postmodern point of view, understood from a cultural return point of view, means to the transformation of structures, means to the building of institutions. So, my plea, and I won't talk about this now, I've written on this elsewhere, it's called Jesup and others. My plea is for a kind of neo-structuralism, where we take the existence and the reproduction of structures and institutions very seriously, but we just can't explain them in the deterministic terms. We just do not explain them in terms of groups and systems, stages in development, and so on. We give a much more prominent role to different forms of agency, a much more prominent role to social practice. It's a concept that should come back to the forefront of sociological discussions these days. Different theories of social practice. There are many, as you know, much better than I do. And they have an important role to play in the definition of social innovation and social innovation. So, I have two presentations which I would like to share with you. Maybe we won't get there. That will, time will show and our interaction will show. These are some of the concerns I have been sharing with myself over the last few weeks, because I'm reading to prepare a new book on social innovation, again together with Diana McCullum, who's the co-editor of the handbook, International Handbook of Social Innovation. So, what is social innovation? And I don't answer the question. I have answered it again and again in a particular context, which I will explain later on. By the way, for me, social innovation always, and that's why I belong to the school of radical social innovation, society, cognitive social innovation. For me, social innovation has to combine satisfaction of unsatisfied or badly satisfied human needs. Innovation is social relations, but from an ethical point of view, meaning solidarity, better communication, associativity, reciprocity, building new communities / forms of society, and with socio-politically transformative role, and so on. Maybe I'm too radical in this, and I am, but I have a message there. Does that mean that I would not consider small-scale micro-initiatives as irrelevant for social innovation? No. It just means that it's a particular practice that may also have a role on changing institutions at a local level. My message would be, look at these particular practices, analyze them, but also reflect on how they can have an impact on new institutionalization, how they can have an impact on the transformation of governance and so on. The conclusion may be zero, but maybe that conclusion is politically irrelevant. Maybe that conclusion would help us learn that, how would I say, that maybe we should put together all these small initiatives to help families, to help kindergartens and so on, and build a movement in order to put pressure on local authorities and on political parties to change their political agenda. Just an example from the top of my head. Okay, it's a break now, according to the technology. As many of you believe in technology, why? Just that I want to speak. Mac always likes to go to speak, and that's why I work with Mac. So, alright, let's go through these questions, and then we'll have the first moment of interaction. So what is social innovation? According to whom? To the Barack Obama Foundation? I have a great sympathy for Barack Obama. I mean, he's one of the greatest orators of the last decades. There's quite a bit of mismatch between what he says and what he did, but I'm also very understanding towards him because with the contrast that is not really an sympathy with what he suggests and wants to establish. It's very hard to establish. So who defines social innovation? Most people don't. They say it's social innovation. There is a new kindergarten with lots of benevolent workers being started. They call it social innovation. Fine. And there is something to be discovered there that will correspond to my definition. I'm very dogmatic. I will always confront with my definition. It's not true. And Belgian surveys, I mean, a point of reference, of course. Politicians have a very strong tendency to speak for their shop. And what is their shop? Their shop is to be elected. So if they have to express rightist discourse to be elected, then they will do it. And so they may be tempted to present social innovation as something to protect their own community of voters in this case. Policymakers can even be worse, because policymakers increasingly today, they are trained in new public management techniques. They are trained to apply a type of micro-business logic to the management of the public sphere, to the management of public domain. And that has lots of dangers in it. I will not elaborate. So these are the politicians and the policymakers. Scientists. Different disciplines. You read a little bit of my work. You read the work by Moulaert, for example, and many other more contemporary writers on social innovation. We can go through them in a minute. You will see that there remains this tendency to speak for your discipline. I recently read a text, obviously they had to cite the work of my network because we were one of the leaders in this movement. But then they said, oh, they are geographers, we should not listen to them, you know. And then they answered the questions which we answered in one of our geographical or planning tests, but they wouldn't read it because it's not sociological or it's not political. This is an absurdity. If you're a serious scientist, you look for the discourse, you look for the debate, not for the discipline. And today, as digital specialists among you know, we have all those data banks which allow us to, in a minimum of time, to find the texts that are interdisciplinary, that speak to each other and so on. High-level Web of Science publications with scholars, scopers, but also screening with Google in all directions in 4 or 5 different languages, you will get a very, very diverse and possibly complementary picture of what is debated on the meaning of social innovation in different disciplines and in different practices. A couple of the texts I was reading, others not, they answer questions about the social political meaning and the societal meaning of social innovation without ever looking at the French literature or at the Canadian literature. Well, all the questions were answered there. So why didn't they read this? We don't read French. But you don't read French, you work with a French colleague and you ask to translate, and even Google Translate is very good these days, I should say. They don't translate any longer, yes, but no. In Greek it could still be a problem. Okay, I have to continue, otherwise this will be my first lecture. So, interdisciplinarity is going on. There's a lot of interdisciplinary work going on, and I'm proud to have played a very important role in this. But at the same time, as I said, it's still very discouraging to see that people are afraid of interdisciplinary work. Why? Because interdisciplinary work means building shared approaches. It's not just multidisciplinarity, saying, oh, the economy is following these market mechanisms, is saying that social innovation can help to prevent market failure. No, that's not the mission of interdisciplinary research. The mission of interdisciplinary research connected to this example would be to find new institutions or to transform existing institutions in order to make sure that the market becomes more localized in order to satisfy particular social needs that are not satisfied or badly satisfied. This is the only good news from Trump, of course, that he will stop the transatlantic trade and investment agreements, which were an even greater threat to local development, to local social welfare than we can ever imagine. It is published quite a bit on this. But this is the only news about Trump, so don't think I'm a partisan.
You will sing, you know. You said you will sing tomorrow for Trump.
Say it again.
You will sing for him tomorrow.
Yeah, but that's a different step. They have to pay for this one. So interdisciplinarity means building joint theories, joint methodologies. Takes time. Just me writing an article and refereeing a lot of your work. That's my job these days as a retired professor. I'm refereeing a lot of work for journals, and almost always on social innovation. It's so disappointing to see how people read things. Go into Google Scholar, they find the article, they read the abstract, they cite it. And it's a scandal to our profession. It's such poor deontology. And of course, if you do it in a profound and well-thought way, you have to discover that what you know on this topic and that what you publish on this topic is only published 2 years later than the one who goes for speed dating and speed publishing. And unfortunately, many referees have the same lack of deontology. They look for the right keywords, they evaluate articles in 1 month, they evaluate 10 articles in 1 month. Well, I tell you, this is not possible. You want to evaluate an article and do justice to an article. You have to read it once, let it rest, make some notes, go back to it. And then after 2-3 months, which was a good habit when I was a researcher, after 2-3 months you send your referee report to make sure that it's balanced, that you have looked at the literature, that you know what you have written and so on. So interdisciplinarity needs time. It needs respect. It needs the willingness to read from other disciplines. It needs the willingness to go back to what Jessel called pro-disciplinary literature, the old German historical schools, the foundations of sociology, Schumpeter, and so on. In dialogue with whom? I'm jumping with it because otherwise you can get from the course of that. In dialogue with whom? I don't think it makes sense to talk about social innovation from the ivory tower of science. There can be moments where you have to return to your ivory tower of science, but then let's make it an ivory tower with a good window, an ivory tower with a view. A view still focused on society, a view still focused on the community with whom you are reflecting together and working together on social innovation. So it is certainly in the entire course of the action research trajectory, it is a matter of cooperation between practitioners, analysts, different roles. In one of my articles, the one I recommended as a matter of fact, chapter 8, I don't know if you had a chance to, there is a small table showing different roles that scientists could or should play in social innovation research. This helps me to reach my steps. So analysts and practitioners, mix of social and cultural capital, the dialogue with whom. This is a kind of implicit criticism and explicit defense of the position, explicit criticism of the way many public participation moments are organized. Who comes to public participation moments? People with a voice, people with a brain, people with a lot of culture and social capital, as Bourdieu would say. They are in those circles where these participation moments are taking place. Participation has to become much more streetwise. It has to happen in a way that maybe could be covered by the image the following image. The mayor has to go down in the street. He has to sit down and spend nights with the squatters. He has to talk to the illegal migrants. He has to talk to the old ladies who are no longer sufficiently mobile to participate in public events for which they have to take a car or public transportation, which is in fact very often inappropriate for them to use because of the lack of accessibility of the cars and so on. So we need a completely different view, much more empathetic, much more interactive view on what participation and from there on co-production is. I think what's Garchin's ladder is passé. It's just about the relationship between the public sector and the citizens, the world, the society, and communities are much more I said this. Then, since we are working with practitioners in action research, as I will explain in my first presentation, this is my zero presentation, we have to be very aware when we define social innovation that we take into account the context. Now, personally, I hate the term context. It's a very, very general one. A very, very general term. But at least it refers to the fact that you have to address in analysis and in action social innovation in the locality, in the societal context, in the institutional dynamics they belong to. You cannot talk about social innovation in an isolated, decontextualized way. It's impossible. Which then leads to the following question. Does it make sense to give an abstract definition to social innovation? If you defend this viewpoint, that it should be contextualized, that it should be rooted, that it should be embedded in the local conditions and the societal dynamics. Well, the answer to this is yes, it still makes sense to distinguish some features which should always be there. Or, correcting myself, features that can help us to identify the type of social innovation, or even saying it in a more focused way, trying to decide, helping to decide if a social innovation is radical in the sense that it can have a social, political, transformative impact. But that's a bit of a jump in the argument. So the different thoughts I wrote down there under the old heading, in which context? Is it social innovation in a micro-institution, micro-organization? Is it a local challenge? Housing, access to parental care, post-school services, and so on? Is it in response to a disaster? New Orleans, loss of housing, a massive scale? What can be done in terms of social innovation to ensure that people from poor neighborhoods get provisional housing and in Is it part of the social mobilization process? You can have social mobilization at a very local level. People expelled from their house, removed from their land, can mobilize in real time and say, you steal our food, you steal our land, you steal our roof, and so we have to mobilize as a local group as soon as possible. But of course, it will also be, as time goes, as historical trajectories evolve, it can also be a social mobilization movement that will be institutionalized after a while. The change of practice in a mainstream organization, and I think many of you will recognize this, you can have a little planning cell and a local authority that says, the way the mayor works with civil society, that's no longer democratic. We don't learn anything. We have to co-produce with these people. So we completely change our modes of participation. We become streetwise in a way. And part of the social political movement and so on. So the role of research, action research, which roles I will deal with that in my first lecture, especially, and then in my second lecture, I will have reflection on the value of innovation systems to analyze and implement social innovation. Authors, I will share with you some bibliographies as we go. So I think it's the first moment to have some interaction, some questions. There, from these are thoughts which I wrote down, reconstructing my mind on what does social innovation mean at the light of the new book I'm preparing. Should I sit in the back? Would you feel more?
How prominent is the role of action research in innovating practice? To me, it's crucial, in the sense that I, coming from a practitioner point of view, when I had to do research, which maybe was not orthodox from the academic point of view, but I need result in order to deliver.
You're part of the academia. I mean, the academic point of view is being rehearsed and reconstructed every day. I mean, that's what I wanted to convince you of in my first sentence. I mean, be a sociologist, appropriate the right to. Anyway, I interrupted you.
That's fine. I obviously agree with that. I mean, practitioner working for an organization, you have to deliver result. You have to intervene on some topics. For me, I've been diverse by child pornography, child prostitution, trafficking, name it. I mean, protection issues. You have to deliver result, and in order to deliver result, you have to understand the situation that were barely explored and known. So you have to do some research. Of course. So picking what you know about methodology and so on. I always did that through action research process because it was the only one to believe. You come from abroad, as an international organization, you step into communitarian, very complex issues and processes. How can you pretend to, even with the international consultant coming and so on, how can you pretend to understand something without the involvement of those that are directly concerned? So to me, it's the only way of doing research if I want to innovate things. What do you think about it?
I fully agree, but there are different sources of knowledge and practice, tacit knowledge if you like, which you will try to put in combination. You will listen to those people, you will understand their problems, you will reflect on how you understand their problems, but then you will also go and read what people elsewhere, scholars, practitioners, have written, have said about this problem, how they have analyzed it, how they have constructed, hopefully co-constructed strategies to deal with these problems. And you bring in this information in the local situation, in the local dialogue about building a solution together. So it's not just the local knowledge. We should not reduce action research to just reproduce what the local actors and the local concerned people are telling you. This is a big challenge because you have to remain democratic. At the same time, you have a role as scientists to play. And in this case, it's the scientists saying, oh, but I also have other sources of information which may be relevant to deal with this problem here. How do I introduce these other sources? How do I introduce this other knowledge? And probably the best way to do this is by referring to practices that were applied elsewhere, that were inspired by these other sources of knowledge. That's how I would say it. Connected to that is, you are in an organization, you have to live up to their expectations. If you as a researcher and your research networks come to the conclusion that, it's an example, the way the organization is dealing with local politicians, with the local political life, political system, if you come to the conclusion that this is not the right way to deal with them, and you can refer to other experiences and other situations where this interaction is more socially efficient, not economically efficient, socially efficient, better context, better understanding, more symbiosis, respect, and so on. And it's your role as a scientist to bring this in, to really explain this. Say, if you continue dealing with the mayor like you do now, it's not going to lead anywhere. So look at how they do it there, or listen to the reflections I have on how this can be changed. Something like that. Is that sufficient as an answer?
Yeah, I mean, provided that people listen to what you're saying. Like, because I can go to local communities or children, that in my case, and saying the experts saying this and that.
Yeah,
and
but that's a very bad start, the experts. You're all the experts in action research.
I'm simplifying, like in the sense that in an appropriate way I can convey the message that from one side get to the other. But the other way around is what I had most challenges on. Like going back, like to institutions, to stakeholders, and to decision makers and so on, and trying to have them integrating their knowledge with the one coming from the action research. That was the main challenges I always had.
I agree, but you're all experts. I mean, that's the starting point. I mean, you're all experts. The woman sitting in her wheelchair in the historical center of Lisbon, who has no longer opportunities to go and to the public meetings organized by the mayor, she is an expert on her immobility and her needs for mobility. She may not be able to express it verbally, but you as an action researcher you have to empathize, you have to go there, you have to understand, I'm talking from a planner's point of view now, you have to understand that the road is not feasible, that you have to find new ways of meeting more locally. In the Portuguese case, you have all the parish structures which should and could play a more active role in making new policy these days. It's, bringing people together in the community houses is usually a very, very good idea.
Time for lunch.
I think the topic is really interesting because I'm just trying to work on personalized services in welfare policies. And what we lack is exactly a sort of interface, interconnection between the voice of people and an expert who can listen to, or are able to listen to, or not, or are not able to listen to. And the problem is that we lack this. We are not able to find out this little, interconnection between people's voice. They are expert in sense. It is not recognized yet.
No,
it is not recognized.
It's arrogant. It's arrogant.
It's arrogant. So the only thing that we can observe is a sort of, I think, this rough and simple distinction between individualized services. Individualized service is that the expert tells you and tailor on you, on your needs, what he thinks is your needs, and is from the expert that the service is constructed and personalized. The needs are sort of interaction between people's voice and the expert voice. But this is not, I can see only this is a big topic because it's not so easy. In Italy, it's not so easy in social services to find this connection. It's a political, it's not a scientific. You can tell them it is necessary, you listen, you give voice, you listen, but it's not only knowledge, it's a political thing. It is like to make this actual research, or before we talk about Ivan he called that radical research. He called it radical research. It is a sort of research co-production of knowledge. So this is a very big issue.
Co-production of knowledge is a very important aspect of action research if it is done well, and if it is done from a social innovation point of view.
Yes, but for sure, Frank, what I can see is that, for example, European Commission takes these keywords and transform it in something that is only another loop in system management of people needs.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
The reaction of people against the European Commission is exactly rooted there. All these managerial blah 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 doesn't have anything to do with the needs of people.
Yeah. And people know it.
I'm very nostalgic of the time of the war, when all this new level management crap didn't have any influence on what was going on in the European Commission. It's a very top-down approach, which is justified by a logic of good management and therefore market efficiency. That's the underlying principle.
Yes, of course. That news is that nowadays they try to tell you that it's not top-down. There's new, is a reciprocity that is top-down.
They tell you top-down, but it's not top-down.
Okay. Please.
May I jump in 1 second?
Let me first jump to the next.
Okay, but I can do it. I have a right voice.
You want to be on the
I want to be on the camera. I want to be on the show.
I don't think you are the camera now.
Yeah, maybe, but that's not the point. I appreciate the fact that you said the role of the expert is not the institutional role of the expert. That's basically the reply you give agreement.
We're all experts.
Yeah, we are all different roles. And also how you reply to jump in my mind what is happening or what is undergoing in this current digital society and what's happening in the social media environment. There is all this space where everybody is on the same level, and there is kind of a utopia of the direct democracy that basically, in fact, doesn't work. Or there is such a problem, that you can explain as it's not realistic.
That's why it's very cool.
I can't see, but that's. So I just want to have your opinion and your point about consumption and basically, all the theories that are undergoing, especially in the marketing, but also later goes into the sociology and reflects a lot on sociology role of consumption and the prosumer, and this connection with putting after the institutional role of the expert. This is, it's a key issue to me.
In all these models, and also in mine, if I can I say? So there is a high level of naivete or utopian aspirations, if you will. Presumption by itself is not a bad idea. But if it's taken over by some players which are financially, politically much more powerful than the people who start the small-scale initiatives and so on, then you're witnessing the, what would I say, the conception of a new capitalist system of consumption and production. So it all comes down, if you want, it all comes down to understand what the societal dynamics are in which a new initiative is taking place. And that's why I stress so much the third dimension of my, collectively shared and built capitalism. I don't know, what time is it?
11, late. I don't know, it's 11 and a half.
11 and a half, and you want to stop at?
As you like.
Yeah?
As you like. After an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Fine. Okay. Not to avoid answering you. That's why I put so much stress on this third feature of social innovation, which is social political empowerment. I don't want to be this cultural prophet or protagonist of social innovation as the only salvation possible. It's just that the term has been there for a few centuries, has had very concrete social political meanings, then received other meanings. I won't go into this today, I don't have time to that, but you can always ask to refer you to some depth. And today is used in two almost antagonistic ways. One, to justify rationalization of the welfare system, it's mostly the European and the foundation approach, and the other one is to re-nourish bottom-up grassroots innovation initiatives with various ambitions, satisfying diversity of people's needs, building new ways of cooperating, of co-construction, co-production, and changing the social political system. Not to go back to top-down communism, not to go back to modernist hierarchical societies, but to rebuild and amend democracy from the bottom up. In some cities and areas it works very well. In other areas it's a disaster. But what can I say? It's nothing new in humanity. Everything we do, everything we try, if 10% of it is successful, we remain a society that will survive in a way. To be 10% successful in what you're doing as a society is amazing. Well, this is very pessimistic. It's not. Look at the rate of divorces, look at the rates of failures in building organizations, look at the fallimenti, what do you say in English? Failures, business failures, and so on. These figures are enormous.
Mental breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, we have too much a view of society as a system that can be organized in a rational way and in which instrumentally set up links can go from resources to expected outputs to come true. But that's, it's a way of utopia, of utopian thinking, but it's a very, very unrealistic way of utopian thinking, rationalism. I think even market ideology or communist ideology is more realistic than this kind of very rationalist behavioral model of innovation systems. That's really a provocation. Markets work in many circumstances. Community-driven municipalities work in many circumstances. Rational systems, instrumental, human social price is enormous. So shall I give my first
there a way to get a coffee or is that?
If you want, yes, if you want a little break for 5 minutes, because we have, okay, 5 minutes for... Sì.